Good morning. Today's daf is daf kafchet of Chullin. We are at the fourth to last line on Kaf Zayin Amabet. Let me share my screen and we will get really started. So yesterday we concluded with the following statement. Rav Yehuda, in the name of Rav Yitzchak Bar Pinchas, said there is no biblical requirement to slaughter birds. Meaning, well, we will find out exactly what it means. But at the moment, I might have thought, heck, it could die on its own. We're going to find out that actually you have to kill it in a nice way, and you have to kill it. But it's not doesn't mean that it can, because we're going to see that it's, as we saw, it is based on the concept that v'shafach, that you can v'shafach es damo, that you can spill out its blood, and that is the method for a bird to become kosher. So all you need to do is spill out the blood, and so that means you make a hole in one of its veins and or arteries, and as a result, it will bleed out, and you'll be fine, and that will be the method of making it kosher. So that is the opinion that Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav Yitzchak Bar Pinchas. And we are going to now pick up and challenge this conclusion three times. So our first, and the simon for the challenge is nisnabel, which is a nevela, dam, and bimalika. So we're going to use those three concepts, three different objections based on nevela, dam, and malika. So let's take a look. Meisvei, I'm going to ask you a question. Hashochev niznabela biyado. If in fact one does slaughters a creature, and it becomes a nevela through what he did, meaning that as a result of some action that he took, rather than a valid shchita, he actually accidentally made it into nevela. How? Hanocher, he pierced it, because that's one of the five ways of a non-kosher animal. The hamaker, or he tore one of the sivanim. So pater milachasos. In that situation, you no longer need to cover the blood. Now, obviously, we're talking about either a wild animal or a bird. So at the moment, we're assuming that we're talking about a bird. And therefore, v'i amrat ein shchita lo min Torah. And if you say that there's no shchita requirement for a bird, well, then nechira so hi shchita so. Well, then when you do the nechira, when you do the piercing, that is how you get the blood out in order to do the shafach es damo. And so as a result, that's like it's slaughtering. So as a result, you've done the right thing. And so as a result, libai kisui, you should require kisui, because that's the process of making a bird kosher to eat, is to pour out the blood and to cover the blood. So how come if you don't do the shechita correctly, you don't have to cover the blood anymore? That would be inconsistent with Rav Yehuda's statement in the name of Rav Yitzchak Bar Pinchas that says that you don't need to do shechita at all for a bird. So misvar ba'of. So you thought that statement was talking about a bird? No, of course not. Bechaya, it's talking about a wild animal, and so that's the story. Okay, so that was challenge number one. Challenge number two. Tashma, come in here. Hashochet, if one slaughters, and Rashi tells us Hashochet, last line, beginning of the line, davar hatzarach kisui, something that requires covering. So you slaughter something that requires covering. V'tzarach ladam, and you need the blood. Chayiv l'chasos, you have to cover it. Ketzad hu osa, so what should he do? O no karo, o okro. So I'm sorry. V'tzarach ladam, and you need the blood for some purpose. Meaning, if you were to shech this animal and have to cover its blood, the whole purpose of your killing the animal would go away, because you need the blood. So chayav l'chasos, and yet he's going to be obligated to cover the blood. So Kezer hu osa, what should he do in order to avoid the obligation and thereby be able to use the blood? O nocha ro, o okro. You either pierce it or you tear one of the pipes. Again, the assumption is that we're talking about birds, and as a result, that's why you and yet we're saying that if you do these things, then you would not be obligated in covering the blood. But if Rev Yehuda in the name of Rav Yitzchak Bar Pinchas is correct, well then who cares how you slaughter it? If the whole purpose is to get the blood out, well, either piercing or tearing is going to be a fine way to get the blood out. And so, therefore, you should still be subject to the obligation to cover the blood. So, my lab ba'of, again, the Gemara says, you think that we're talking about a bird? And Rashi explains, why would you need a bird's blood? My lab ba'of, kai, meaning that you think that we're talking about a bird, sharei damo roi lianicha, that the blood of of a bird is helpful with yanicha. What is yanicha? Yanicha is, Rashi continues, litolas hagadla bibigdei semer. It's a worm that grows in wool. Shekorin tinya. That's called a tinya. Kediksiv kebeged achlu ash. This is a pasuk kaf chet in Parak Yud Gimel of Eov, where it's like where the comparison is made to a piece of clothing that a moth ate. So it's like some kind of moth-based creature. Amar nocha ro v'yipater, and yet we say in this in this brisa that if you pierce it, it would be exempt minakisui from covering. The ein shchita laof, but if there is no shchita for a bird, nocha wrote sarach kisui. The piercing should require covering. Shazo hi shchita so, because that's the process of applying it. And so so you thought it was for a bird. So back into the Gemara, fourth word on the first line, because you thought that you needed the blood in order for this special worm that grows in, this moth-based worm or pre-moth worm. No, that's not what it is at all. As we pick up with the second line of the Gemara, Bechaya, we're talking about a wild animal. You needed its blood for laka. Well, what's laka? Well, Rashi helps us out. Laka, last of the wide lines at the top of Rashi. Tsava or Edom Shekorin Pirka. It's this dye for leather that is red, and it is called Pirka. So, all right, so as a result, again, we've tried to say that doesn't this show that Rav Yehuda is wrong, that birds actually do require shkita from the Torah, and we have failed again. So our third challenge, Tashma Malach Basakin. We had this was a Mishnah back in Zvachim, and we saw that this Mishnah in Zvachim said the following: if you do malika with a knife, and you're not supposed to do malika with a knife, what do you do malika with? You use the nail, your thumbnail. So mitame begadim abesa bliya. The dead animal that results is considered a nevela. It is not considered a shechted kosher animal. It's important to recognize the difference between the two. When you have a kosher bird, if it is dies on its own, or if it dies not through shechita, well, then it is a nevela. And rather than becoming tameh through touch, it becomes tameh if it is swallowed. And the tuma is such that it would even make your garments tameh that you're wearing. And so that is the nature of a kosher bird that is dead. But if you successfully shechted the kosher bird and it turned out that it was a treifa, then it would not be tameh at all, even if you were to eat it. It's still not kosher because it was a treifa, but it's not going to be tameh. V'i amrat ein shkita la'ov min Torah. But now, 1 second, so that's what it said, that if you do malika with a knife, you have ended up creating a nevela. But if you're telling me that a bird does not require shchita, well, then why have you create? Why is it a nevela and not considered a kosher bird that was killed, that was a treifa and was killed, in a fine manner? Because we've already said that when whatever kind of cut you make to kill the animal, Zohi shchita, so that is the way you shecht it. Nehi nami deki tavar le shidra umafreket. Look, I understand because we're talking about Malika, you're doing it from the back of the neck, and so you will have broken the bird's spinal cord and vertebra. So havyale la treifa. That we understand that it's a treifa and not going to be a kosher shchita, but a kosher killing, because that's what you need to do in order to make the bird kosher. But tahanile sakin l'tara midi nevela. But at the very least, the knife's work should allow, because this is the form of shchita. Because again, according to Rav Yehuda says that when it comes to a bird, shchita is not necessary, and you can kill the bird in pretty much any manner that results in the blood pouring out. And so, as a result, let this killing be that kind of killing, and therefore the bird shouldn't be a nevela. It should be like a shechted treifa, which does not convey any tuma. So, isn't that show that Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Pinchas must be wrong, and it must be because, of course, again, the Mishnah itself says that it's considered a nevela, and so the fact that it's considered a nevela shows that the shechita doesn't work. So again, isn't that a proof against Rav Yitzchak? So no, not necessarily. Hu de Amar ki Tana. You're right that Mishnah disagrees with Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Pinchas. However, he would say the following: Tanya, he would agree with the following brisa, with the following opinion. Rabbi Elazar Hakapar Beribi Omer. Rabbi Elazar Hakapar, who was Beribi, Rashi reminds us that Beribi means Gadol Bidoro. He was the greatest in his generation. And what did he say? Ma Talmud Lomer Ach Kasher Yeachel Es Hatzvi. There's the pasuk that says, there's a pasuk Tvarim Yud Bet pasuk Kaf Bet, and it says that even the deer, and it continues Ach Kasher Yeachel Es Hatzvi Es Hayal, that whenever you want to eat a deer or a hart, Kain tochlenu, you should eat it in this way. Hatamei v'hatahor yachdav yochlenu. Whether a person is tahor or tamei, they can eat the item. And so this, and so what do we learn from this? V'chimala madu mitzvi v'ayal me'ata. What do we learn from the fact that this pasuk mentioned both the tzvi and the ayal? You might have thought that it was to tell us something about the deer and the hart, but actually it is to teach us something about something else. This is the reference that we had yesterday, that the tzvi and the ayal are going to be connected to animals that were sanctified and became tamei and ineligible to be shechted in the Beis Hamikdash and slaughtered as a sacrifice, and therefore they just get slaughtered ordinarily. So, and that's because the prior pasuk talks about being far away from the Beis Hamikdash. Take a look at the Rashi. Ach kasher yachel v'gomer b'psulei mikudashim sheniftu b'mamon kai. That when that pasuk of kasher kasher yachel is also teaching us about the context of when you have a redeemed animal that didn't make it into as a sacrifice. It got some kind of mum, and so as a result, it needed to be sold. So that animal that now has this blemish on it can still be used as a sacrifice. And what is the lesson that we learned? Ma psuli hamukdashin b'shchita Af tzvi v'ayal b'shchita, just as a consecrated animal needs to be that becomes disqualified needs to be slaughtered in the proper manner. So too, the tzvi and the ayal also need to be slaughtered in the proper manner. And what doesn't need to be slaughtered in the proper manner? V'of ein lo shchita l'medivrei Torah, elam medivrei sofrim. And this Tana is explicit that says that birds do not need to be slaughtered biblically. And so you're absolutely right that the Mishnah that we cited from Zvachim is inconsistent with Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Pinchas because that Mishnah seems to be very clear that a bird must require shchita. But you know what? It is inconsistent with this alternative brisa, and as a result, Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Pinchas can say, you know what? I'm consistent with that other brisa that is explicitly like what I said, namely that birds do not need to be slaughtered biblically. They only need shchita because of a rabbinic decree. Okay, so Mantana de Poligale de Rabbi Elazar HaKapar, who is the author of our Mishnah in Zvachim that argues with Rabbi Elazar HaKapar? It's Rebbe, Titania, because we have the following brisa. The Rebbe Omer v'zavachta ... kasher tzvisicha. Although these words are lined up right next to each other, in fact, the pasuk has them not right next to each other. Let's read the pasuk. It's Perek Yud Bet pasuk Kaf Aleph. It's the previous pasuk to what we were just talking about. Ki yirchak mimcha hamakom, when the place of Yerushalayim and the base of Mikdash is far away from you. Asher yivchar Hashem elokecha l'sum shmo sham, the place that Hashem chooses to put his name there, namely Yerushalayim and the base of Mikdash. V'zavachta mibekarcha umitzoncha, and you now slaughter from your cattle and your sheep. Asher nasan Hashem elokecha, asher nasan la Hashem lecha, that Hashem has given to you. Kasher tzivisicha, as is commanded to you. Va'achalta bisharecha, you can eat it in your gates. As you desire. So again, the pasuk says v'zavachta, and then a few words later it says kasher tzivisicha. So what does that teach us? So melamed shenitzdav Moshe al haveshet va'al hakana. This is teaching us that Moshe himself was commanded to cut concerning the esophagus and the trachea. Al rov echad ba'of, that a majority of one of them needs to be cut for a bird. Al rov shnayim, and a majority of both of them needs to be cut bebehema. So that is clearly, given that Rebbe just said that this is a statement of Hashem commanding Moshe regarding birds, it's got to be that the bird requires shchita from the Torah. So zehu. So that's the machlokas. We have in the end we have a machlokas Tanaim. Rabbi Elazar HaKapar on one hand, Rebbe on the other hand, and we have a machlokas among the Amoraim because we have Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Pinchas on the one hand, and we have basically everybody else on the other hand. Okay, so I forgot to scroll, but here we go. I'll scroll a little bit and leave that up. And now we're going to return to our Mishnah. And our Mishnah said that, we quote our Mishnah. The Gemara notes, so we're going to quote our Mishnah where it says, Echad ba'of, one pipe for a bird. And so the Gemara notes that we say that only one pipe must be cut for a bird, which leads to the following debate, which the Gemara will attempt 5 times to resolve. So echad ba'of, one pipe for a bird. So itmar, it was said about it. Rav Nachman amar o veshet o kana. You can shecht either of the esophagus or the trachea. It's your choice. Rav Ada bar Ahava amar veshet velo kana. No, you have to do the esophagus. You can't do the trachea. Rav Nachman amar o veshet o kana. Rav Nachman says you can choose your choice because echad katani. The Mishnah says one echad koldahu, whichever one you want. Rav Ada bar Ahava Amar Veshet below Kana. Rav Ada says no, it's one, and I'll tell you it's only the esophagus and not the trachea because my echad. What does it mean by one? Miyuchad. It's a special one. Well, what makes the esophagus special? So Rashi helps us out. It's Rashi. If you have a newer Gemara, it's right next to the Torah or Hashalim on the right hand side of the page. Otherwise, it's 3, 6, 9, 10, 11, 12, 15, 18, 21, 24, 23 or so lines up from the bottom of the narrow lines of Rashi. Veshet miyuchad, it's unique. Shabisimanim, among the two simanim. There, of course, there's again the Veshet and the Kana. The Veshet is the esophagus, the Kana is the trachea. So when it comes to these simanim, Shechayos habehema tolibo. The Veshet, the esophagus, the animal's life is more dependent on it being whole. Daha benekev b'mashu, even a small hole in the esophagus, mitrafa, causes the animal to be a treifa. V'ilu kaneh, but when it comes to the trachea, if you have a small hole, it's not going to be a problem. Adamifsak ruba, you need a hole that is so large that it actually breaks through the majority of the trachea. It's not enough to have a little hole. So, God forbid any of these holes. But in any event, that's the bottom line: is that the esophagus is more life necessary in the sense of even a small hole is problematic. So that makes it the unique one. So now Siman Shacheh, Hachatzayin, Gargeres, Pegima, Dechatas Ha'of. So we got 5 different words there, cutting and halves, and the trachea, the Gargeres is another word for trachea, Pegima, a blemish, and Chatas Ha'of, a bird chatas. Those are going to be our 5 challenges, and so let's go through them. So Meisvei, challenge number 1. So shachat as haveshet va'achar nishmita hagargeres. If you successfully slaughter the veshet of a bird, and then the gargeres moves out of place, kshera, it is going to be a kosher shchita. Why? Well, Rashi helps us out. Shachat as by the way, it says shachat is a veshet, but we're talking about a bird. And why is it kosher? Well, all you need to do is cut one of the pipes. Here you've cut the esophagus, and it will be kosher. So because anything that happened, the trachea's detachment afterwards is not going to create a treifa because the animal was already shechted. Whereas nishmata gargeres va'achar shachat es haveshet, if however the trachea became detached and then you slaughter the esophagus, psula, then the animal is invalid because it was a treifa when you slaughtered it. Shachat es haveshet v'nimtzis gargeres shmuta. However, if you don't know which the order was because you slaughtered the veshet and then you find the gargeres detached, and you don't know whether it came detached before or after, this was actually what happened, and they said, kol suffix shebishchita psula. Anytime you have an uncertainty with respect to slaughter, we're going to say that it's invalid. So now, ve'ilu shchita begargeres lo katani. But listen, we don't even mention slaughtering by the gargeres. It's only by the esophagus. So doesn't this show that Rav Ada bar Ahava is correct and Rav Nachman is wrong? No, it does not. Meaning, let's take a look at Rashi. V'ilu shchita bargeres lo katani. Delema shachas gargeres v'achar kach nishmat haveshet. Why doesn't this brisa tell us about what happens if you slaughter the trachea and then the esophagus gets detached, and tell us that in that situation it's kosher? Alma lo mitkishra bikana l'chudei. Doesn't this show that slaughtering the slaughtering the trachea alone is not going to be kosher? So that's the question. And therefore, again, it would contradict Rav Nachman, who says you could slaughter either of them, and it would support Rav Ada, who says that you have to slaughter the esophagus, you have to cut the esophagus. Not necessarily. Mishum de gargeres avida liishtamute. No, this brisa is just telling us the case associated with what is likely to happen. And the trachea is much more likely to become detached than the esophagus. And so that's the case that it talked about. Okay, so that proof didn't work. And as a result, we are back to our original question. Who's right? Rav Nachman or Rav Ada? So Tashma, Shachat Shnei Chatzae Simanim Ba'of. Psula. If you slaughtered two halves of the two pipes of a bird, the shechita is invalid because you didn't shecht a majority. And it certainly doesn't need to be said about a larger animal that that's the case because you need to shecht the majority of both of the pipes. And again, by shechting just half, you don't have a majority of both pipes. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Ba'ov, and Rabbi Yehuda says with respect to a bird, Ad sheyishchot es haveshet ve'es havridim. You have to slaughter the esophagus and the vridim. So again, it's focused on the esophagus. And the Tanakama doesn't argue with Rabbi Yehuda about this point, meaning they argue about the viridin, but there's no argument about the esophagus. As Rashi puts it, ad sheyishchot, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lines up in the Rashi. The Tanakama lo palig ella avaridin. The Tanakama that gave the other opinion did not argue except for with respect to the viridin. And so as a result, isn't this show that everybody agrees that the esophagus is the one that needs to be cut, and therefore that Rav Ada is correct and Rav Nachman is wrong? No, again, not necessarily. Mishum deveshet samach levaridin. No, it's because the esophagus is the pipe that is specifically close to the varidin, those blood vessels that Rabbi Yehuda says need to be shechted. It could either be
Are they referring to the dafka, the vridim, or do they also include the orkim, the arteries as well?
Well, it's unclear what the vridim mean, whether the vridim are...
Well, vridim are the veins, but the orkim are arteries.
Well, I will note that earlier, at least the note here says that it's not clear whether it's the...
whether you have the carotid artery,
or the jugular vein. So it's not clear which one it is, and it may even be both. Rashi is just notes that it's the pathways for a lot of blood. It's not clear which direction that blood is going. So as a result, it's not particularly clear, and it could even the note here indicates that it could be both. But you're absolutely right; it could just be the jugular vein. But the bottom line is, I assume that all of them are sufficiently close to the esophagus that it's not that isn't a definitive proof. But in any event, the
internal jugular as opposed to the external. It's more significant.
Okay. So in any event, the bottom line is that the reason that Rabbi Yehuda specifically mentions the veshet is not because he's saying that that's what needs to be cut, but if you're going to have to cut the viridin, what makes sense to cut is the esophagus. And so again, not a successful proof. And now we turn things around. And now we try to refute Rav Ada bar Ahava. Tashma, come in here. Shachat chatzi nigargares v'shaha. If you cut half of the trachea and then you wait, kedei shchita acheres, the amount of time that it would take to do another shchita. Now, ordinarily, shehiyah is an invalidation. But here, because you have shechted half of the trachea, we can revisit the situation. And again, when it comes to the trachea, for the animal to be a treifa, it needs to you need to have cut a majority of it. There needs to be a hole through the majority, and here the hole is only through half. And so, as a result, this animal is not yet a treifa. And so, if we were to stop this shechita right at this moment, it would not be a treifa yet. So Vigamar, and now he completes the shchita. Shchita so kshera. It is a valid shchita. So doesn't it? No. So my lab ba'of. Aren't we talking about shchita of a bird? Umay Gemara lagargeres. And when we say that you're finishing the cutting, you're finishing the cutting of the trachea. And so that would show that cutting the trachea alone is good for a bird. And therefore, clearly, Rav Ada Barahava, who says you need to shech the esophagus, is wrong. No, not necessarily. Lo, we can say that this brisa b'vehema is talking about a larger animal. Umay gemara, and when it says that you finish the shchita, gemara la shchita kula, it means that you're finishing the cutting of both the trachea and the esophagus. So no luck on that effort to refute Rav Ada Barahava. So another effort to refute Rav Ada Barahava. Tashma harei shehaya chatzi kana pagum. There was a situation where half of the trachea was blemished, and again, it was exactly a half, not a majority. So as a result, the animal is not yet a treifa. And you added a little bit, and you finished. So shchita so kshera. Again, that shchita is kosher. So again, because the animal before you began the process was not yet a treifa, and then you did the cut that made it that effectively killed it because you cut the majority of the trachea, and so as a result, my labov, isn't this talking about a bird? Umay gemaro lekaneh, and then when we say that you finished it, it means that you finished cutting the trachea. Again, lo bevehema umay gemaro lebashet. It means that when you finished it, it's talking about a larger animal, and when you finished, you also cut the esophagus, and so as a result, not a proof against Rav Ada Barahava. Tashma, fifth and final effort. Let's see what happens. Okay, it's going to be a good proof. How do we do malika on a bird chatas? Chotik shidra. You cut the spine, umafrekes, and the vertebra below rov basar, but you make sure not to cut the majority of the flesh that's covering the spine and the vertebra. Ad shemagia laveshet olakane, until you get to either the esophagus or the trachea. Hagia laveshet olakane. Then when you get to them, chosech simen echad, you cut one of them. The rov basar imo, and you cut the majority of the flesh on the back at the same time. Uva ola shnayim o rov shnayim. And when it comes to an ola, you cut the majority of both. You cut both of them or a majority of both. So to Yuvta the Rav Ada Barahava, isn't this a refutation of Rav Yehuda Rav Ada Barahava? You better believe it, to Yuvta. In fact, we've refuted him, so it's clear that when it comes to Malika, that it doesn't make a difference which one. So presumably the same thing is true for a shchita. So my havala. So all right. So what did you decide? Whoa, mahavala, kiddukamrat. What do you mean? What did we decide? You just told me that we had a tiyuvta of Rav Ada Barahava. That means that the halacha is like Rav Nachman. So how can you say what did we decide? So no, Dilma shiny hasam ika shidro mafrekes. No, when you do malika, maybe that's different because you cut already the spinal cord and the vertebra. That is going to be sufficient so that now when you cut just the trachea, it's the animal's going to be sufficiently dead. But here. So what do you have? What's the law with respect to an actually slaughtered bird? So actually, we end up having a sixth effort. So a sixth effort that is again going to refute Rav Ada Barahava definitively. Tashma coming here. Dahu bar Abza. There was a goose or a duck, Dahava Bay Rabba, that was at Rabba's home. Asa kimimasmes kue dama. It turned out that its neck had a blood stain on it. Amarava heki nabin. How are we going to investigate this animal? Because what do we have to do? Nishchate v'hader nivdike. If we slaughter it and then investigate it, Dilma b'makom nekev kashachit. Maybe the whole problem and why it has blood on its neck is because we slaughtered it in the location where the tear occurred internally, and it is actually a treifa, and therefore it won't be kosher. Nivdike v'hader nishchate. So maybe we should slaughter it, or at least we should check it out and then slaughter it, meaning that we at least cut open the animal and investigate the outside of the pipes in order to see that they're all okay. And then we slaughter it. Ha'amar Rabba, but Rabba said, Veshet ein lo bedika mimichutz ela mimifnim. When it comes to the esophagus, you cannot check it from the outside, only from the inside. As Rashi explains, Kavchedim a bet, top line, end of the line, Ein lo bedika mibechutz. Lefishahu treifa benekev b'mashahu. When it comes to the esophagus, which is causes an animal to be a treifa with even a smallest hole, the eino nikar, it is not going to be obvious. The tipas dam nichneset slow. You're going to end up having a little bit of blood go in and stop up the hole. Bifnim benekev bifnim into the hole. Benekev the eno nikar, and it won't be obvious. Aval karam hapnimi, when it comes to the inner surface, lavanhu, it's white. The tipas dam nikerispo, and so as a result, when you turn the esophagus inside out, it would be obvious if there was a blood dot in it. Aval hachitzon edom, but the outer surface of the esophagus is red, and so as a result, that blood spot will not be obvious from the outside. So that is why you need to do the esophagus check from the inside. So, and then Rashi says, the nivdika, I'm sorry. So now let's go on. So Amarle Rav Yosef Bray. So Rav Yosef, Rava's son, says, nivdike lakana. Let's examine the trachea, the nishkate lakana, and then we'll sever the trachea because the trachea doesn't have that problem. Remember, first of all, the trachea, in order for it to be a treifa, it needs to have a hole that is a majority of the way around the trachea. It's not enough to have a small hole. So we'll examine the trachea, make sure the trachea is okay. We'll then slaughter the animal by cutting the trachea, the and then it will be kosher. And as a result, we can then take out the esophagus, and then we can turn the veshet inside out and check it. As Rashi says, "V'nivdika shakana nivdik b'mechutz." You can check the trachea from outside. Lefisha enu nitraf elabirov, because it requires a hole through most of it. V'hadar nishkate lekana, and then we can go back, and then we can continue with the shchita and shech the kana, shech the trachea, v'ashchita kshera, and it's a good kosher b'simin echad, because you cut one simin. And then yitzlu haveshet, you can remove the esophagus kulo entirely, v'yakruhu min halechi, and uproot it and pull it out from the jaw, v'yafchuhu, and turn it inside out, v'yivdekuhu, and you can check it out. So that works out great. And Rava his father is impressed. Amar Rava, Chakim Yosef Bri, my son Yosef is really wise, b'treifot, in treifas, Rabbi Yochanan, just like Rabbi Yochanan. And Rashi explains the two possible meanings of this. Damrin Perak Gidanasha, as we are going to see on Daf Tzadik Heyom Bet in this Masechet, the Shadar Le Shmuel, Tuleser Gemale, Sfiki de Treifa, Lemivdeke Begavayu, that Shmuel sent 13 camel loads of uncertain treifot to Rabbi Yochanan in order to get them all checked out, so that he could learn about the laws of treifa. So lishnach. So that's one possibility. Meaning, when it says that it's like Rabbi Yochanan, it means, well, Rabbi Yochanan was really good in treifas also, and so too my son is. But lishnachrina, No, Rabbi Yochanan b'kol mili. Rabbi Yochanan was really a smart guy in everything. And so my son is smart when it comes to trephos, the way Rabbi Yosef, with the way Rabbi Yochanan was smart with respect to everything else. So two ways to understand that, both reflected in this Rashi. Okay, Alma echad de So, but the bottom line is, as we go back into the Gemara, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines down. Alma. So we see Echad de Ka'amar, when it's said in our Mishnah, one pipe needs to be cut. Oh hi, it could be either of them. Because clearly in this case, they cut only the trachea, and that disagrees with Rav Ada bar Ahava and is consistent with Rav Nachman, who says that you could cut either of them. Okay. So
Rabbi Adabar, but is he the one who said that the trachea, if it was cut, it would not be kosher? Is that right?
he's the one who says that if you did shechita only on the trachea, it would not be kosher. Correct?
Right. Okay. Right.
Okay. So Rabbi Yehuda Omer ad sheyishcha. Right. Rabbi Yehuda said that you also have to shech the veridin, and so now the Gemara is going to clarify what exactly that means. So let's take a look. So and in fact, once it clarifies it, it's going to then challenge the clarifying statement 3 times. So Amar Rav Chisda says, Lo Amar Rabbi Yehuda ela ba'of. Although our Mishnah does not refer to a context for Rabbi Yehuda's statement, that statement is only talking about birds. Because people roast the entire bird. And so as a result, if you do not cut the viridin, there may be a lot of blood left in the animal. Aval behema, but when it comes to a larger animal, kevan minatcha aver, since you cut it up into smaller pieces, lo tzarich, and therefore the blood will have a chance to go out. You don't need to. As Rashi tells us, it's let's take a look at Rashi kulo ke'echad ho v'tzoleh kulo ke'echad lefikach tzarich lahotzi es kol damo. As a result, we need a method to get rid of all its blood, and that's why we're going to require the cutting of the viridin. Okay, so now again we're going to have 3 challenges. So lememra de time of Rabbi Yehuda mishum damhu. You're telling me that the reason of Rabbi Yehuda has nothing to do with the nature of shchita, but rather all to do with getting rid of the blood. But 1 second, what did our Mishnah say? V'atanan, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, ad sheyishchot es havridin. The Mishnah said you have to do shchita on the vridin. Doesn't that show that this is not about the blood, but rather about the process? And the process requires the cutting of the vridin? No, that's not necessarily, as Rashi tells us, right? Ad sheyishchot v'i lisnehu b'shchita. And if you're going to tell me that it's not about the shchita, if you're just going to tell me that it's about getting out the blood, well, then making any kind of hole should be sufficient. Why did the Mishnah specifically mention shchita? So the Gemara answers, Ema, no, what he meant is the following. Ad sheyinkov es havridin. It means that he punctures the viridin. He makes a hole in the viridin. Umay ad sheyishchot. And why does it say ad sheyishchot? Ad sheyinkov b'shas shchita. You have to make that hole at the same time that you do shchita. Okay, effort number 2. Tashma, we have a brisa of vridin b'shchita, divri Rabbi Yehuda. Again, it says that the vridin have to be cut b'shchita with a shchita. So doesn't that show that it's part of the shchita and not part of making a hole in order to get rid of the blood? Again, aim of vridin tzarich l'nakvan b'shas shchita, divri Rabbi Yehuda. The point of what he's saying is Rabbi Yehuda is saying that you have to make a hole in the vridin at the time of the shchita. Tashma, 3rd challenge. Amru lo Rabbi Yehuda. They said to Rabbi Yehuda, again, this is a brisa that is continuing the discussion effectively from our Mishnah. Since the vridin are mentioned only with respect to getting the blood out of them, mali b'shchita, mali shelo b'shchita. What does it matter whether you do it with shchita or you do it not with shchita? This is really clear. It's very clear that according to the rabbis it's about the blood, but you, Rabbi Yehuda, are saying it's there's something more to it because you are saying that it has to be done bishchita as a shchita. Miklal Rabbi Yehuda savar bishchita. It seems very clear from this statement that Rabbi Yehuda must mean that it's done as a part of the shchita with the shchita knife, etc. No, haki kamar, and again the Bach changes the law to lay. This is what they were saying to him. So mali lenakvan b'shas shchita, mali lenakvan l'shalo b'shas shchita. No, what they were really saying is, who cares whether I make the hole at the time of shchita? Meaning, you, Rabbi Yehuda, said that the purpose is because of the blood, and therefore it should be fine to make a hole. But you're telling me that you have to make the hole at the time of shchita. Who cares? Let him make the hole 5 minutes later. It's still going to drain all the blood. So the answer is Vehu Savar, and Rabbi Yehuda's response and thinking was B'shas shchita asidam d'chayim. No, when the shchita, at the time of shchita, the blood is much warmer, and so as a result, it will flow easily. Shelo b'shas shchita lo asidam de karir. It's cold and it's going to congeal, and so as a result, you have to do the hole at the time of shchita. Okay, and so as a result, we have definitively shown that we've got this explanation, and it's pretty much a good explanation. Now, Rabbi Yirmiyah asks a question that gives us a chance to give another conversation that resulted in the same result. So by Rabbi Yirmiyah, Vridin the Rabbi Yehuda, Shah behen daras behen. If you did when cutting them, meaning after you've cut the other pipes, you now do a something that would create a psul in the shchita if it's part of the shchita. Namely, you waited, you paused, or you engaged in pressure. And so in any of those situations, mahu, what's the law? And frankly, it could have asked about if you tore them as well. But in any event, it asks, what is the law? So Amrle, but it wants to use things that would not cause the rest of the shchita to be problematic. Here, these are things that you can do with a valid shchita knife. Whereas when it comes to tearing, that is usually, why do things tear? It's because there's a nick in the knife. And a nick in the knife would make the knife puzzle. And so as a result, that's probably why it doesn't say tearing here. But in any event, Amr Hahu Saba. So a certain elder, remember we saw that according to Tosos, raised the possibility that at least generally Hahu Saba means Eliyahu. But in any event, it was some elder who said, Haki Amr Rabbi Lazar. Here's what Rabbi Lazar said. But Amrila, and some say it wasn't that he just said that Rabbi Lazar said it, but Amrila Hahu Saba Rabbi Elazar. The Saba said it to Rabbi Elazar, and he said, Haki Amr Rabbi Yochanan. This is what Rabbi Yochanan said. Menakven bekotes behain. You can even puncture it with a thorn, and the meaning the vridin, and it will still be kosher. Meaning you can do the shehiyah, you can do the darisa, you can do whatever you want when it comes to these the vridin, because the whole purpose is getting the blood out. Tanya Kavasi de Rav Chisda, and in fact we have a brisa that is consistent with Rav Chisda. Shachat shnei chatzai simani be'of, that when it comes to cutting the two half simanim for a bird, puzzle. It's puzzle because you haven't cut a majority of even one. And the same thing is true for a larger animal. And Rabbi Yehuda then adds, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, be'of, when it comes to a bird, you have to slaughter the veshet and the viridin. And so as a result, this is a definitive proof that when Rabbi Yehuda says you have to cut the viridin, he's only talking about birds and not anything else. Okay, so our Mishnah concluded by noting that half of one pipe makes slaughter invalid for a bird. So we're now at the 2 dots, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines up from the last of the narrow lines in the Gemara on Kafchat Amabet. Chatzi echad ba'of. If you cut half of one pipe of a bird, so itmar. So we have a machlokas. Rav Amar mechza al mechza karov. Rav says that when it comes to cutting 50-50, meaning exactly half, it's like a majority. Whoa, if you're already thinking, 1 second, haven't we said lots of things where it said was exactly a half and it was problematic? You're absolutely right. We are going to bring those as challenges to this statement, and we'll have to update our understanding of it as a result. Rav Kahana Amar Mekta al Mekta Eino Karov. And Rav Kahana says, no, if it's exactly half, that's not a majority, and therefore it's not going to be a valid shchita when it comes to shchita. So Rav Amar Mekta Mekta Karov Haki Amar Le Rachmana Moshe. That when the Moshe was commanded to do shchita, he was commanded lo tishaya ruba. Don't leave over a majority. Meaning, as long as you do half, you haven't left over a majority, and therefore you're fine. Rav Kahana Amar Mekta al Mekta Eino Karov. Rav Kahana says, no, 50-50 is not enough. Haki Amar Le Rachmana Lish Moshe. This is what the Torah was telling, what Hashem was telling Moshe. Shchot Rubo. You got to shech the majority of it. So, Simin Chatzi Katina Gargeris Pegima. So we have, we're going to now have a series of challenges. So, challenge number one, Tanan, Chatzi Echad Ba'of, Ve'echad B'Chatzi B'Behema, Shchita Psula. 1 second. We have our Mishnah explicitly says that half of one pipe or for a bird and 1.5 pipes for an animal is not a valid shchita. So amra, if mekta mekta karov, and if you're saying like Rav that half is like a majority, amai puzzle. Why should it be invalid? Ha'avale rov. He did the majority, and so as a result, it should be a valid shchita. So Gemara explains, you're absolutely right, and this is going to resolve a lot of our concerns. Midrabanan, that was rabbinically, it was prohibited. Dilma lo asim le'me'eved palga, because we're worried that if you don't do a majority and you do exactly half, it'll actually be a little less than half, and then you'll have a non-kosher shchita. And so the rabbi said, although Rav is correct that in fact 50-50 is a majority, as soon we are not going to say that shchita is good because we're worried that you will not cut enough. Our second challenge and final challenge for today, Amar of Katina Tashma Chilko L'Shnayim, you cut it into 2 pieces. Now, what is this referring to? Rashi helps us out. Chilko L'Shnayim, it's Rashi 1, 2, 3, 6, 9, 12, 13 lines up in the narrow lines of Rashi. Chilko L'Shnayim, Tanur. We're talking about an oven, Shenitma, and it's talking about an earthenware oven that became Tameh. Ein lo tahara. There is no way to make it tahor. You can't just like put it in a mikvah. You can't just fire it up. There's no way to make it tahor. Ella nitzitza. You have to smash it. Kediksiv, yutatz, as the Torah tells us that it needs to be smashed. This is Vayikra Perak Yud Aleph, Pasuk Lamed Hey. V'im nishtayar rubo. But if a majority of the oven remains, rubo shalom, and it's complete, lav netitzahu, that cannot be considered a smashing. And so as a result, if you smash it into 2 pieces, well, one of those pieces is clearly a majority. Vehain shavin, and they're about equal. Shneihen tamehen, both of them are considered tameh. You have not broken it down enough. Lefi she'i efshar l'tzamtzem, because it's impossible to be precise. 1 second. And why is it going to be tameh? It's because we don't know which of these 2 halves is actually a majority. But after l'tzamtzem, if you could break it into exactly half, tahorin. This Mishnah, this Brisa says that the 2 halves of the oven would each be pure. But amai tahorin, why should they be pure? Zil hacha ikaruba, zil hacha ikaruba. Since each is a half, it's a majority. And so as a result, you have a majority here, you have a majority here, and therefore both halves should be tameh. So Amarav Papa, Trey Rube, Bechad Mana, Leka. Nah, that is inconsistent. While Rav's statement is true, that chetzi chetzi is like, that half is like rove, you can't end up with more than a whole. And here, if you have exactly half on one and exactly half on the other, you would end up with two rows, and that would be that's impossible. You can't cut something in half and end up with more than one. And so as a result, therefore, that is why when Rav makes his statement is only true in other contexts, not in this context. As Rashi explains, Trey Rube Leka Lameir B'chad Mana. Last Rashi on the dot, and last Rashi for today. De'i high ruba, that if in fact we called this a majority, meaning that if we call this half a majority, high meuta, we have to say that the other half is a minority. And therefore, since you can't do that if it's exactly half, because you would be wanting to say that in both directions, we are going to treat exactly half as broken, and therefore that brisa is still consistent with Rav. But le'inyan shchita, when it comes to shchita, lo huzka rov ela b'chaticha. The only rove that we care about is in the cutting, not in what is remaining. V'chi karina palga rove, and when we say that half of a cut is considered a majority, chatoch leka chatok lekel. The kikarina pilga rov chatok. I'm sorry. The kikarina palga rov chatok leka. Meaning that if we say that if we were to say that the what is cut is half, so then I'm sorry, if we say that what is whole is half, we don't say that the what is cut is not sufficient. Demachish lay the high palga the kai lo mikre ro shalem. Sorry, hold on one second. I'm just Avala inyan shkita lo huzkarov ela bechaticha. When it comes to the shkita, we only focus on the majority of the cut. B'chi karina palga ro chatach leka demichish le the high palga the kai lo mikri ro shalom. We don't have to worry about the other half to say that the other half is considered complete, because we are not going to consider half of a completeness equal to rove of the completeness, because we are focused solely on the cut. And so that's how I believe you read that Rashi. And so again, the Gemara is going to offer at least one more attempt to challenge Rav. But for that challenge, you'll have to stay tuned for tomorrow's daf. Wishing everyone a wonderful day.